Welcome, everyone, to The Wandering Jew. If anyone is new to our series, I'm just going to show that this is the text that we're using, The Wandering Jew from Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg, Mystical Musings and Inspirational Insights. And as I've explained, I hope people who have heard this don't mind, but just in case someone's new, this book is based on Rabbi Ginsburg's tweeting and blogging in the year 2010. Many years later, maybe in like 10 years after that, his students just went back and took the blogs and the tweets and organized them according to subjects. So this is the maybe fourth class that we've had. We've been going in the order of the book, but here for anyone who has it, we're starting at page 120. And the reason that I'm jumping ahead now is it's Lag BaOmer. It is what's called the holiday of the inner dimension of the Torah. So we celebrate the passing of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, who passed away on Lag BaOmer, but it's recorded his last day in this world and his teachings in the section of the Zohar called the Idra Zuta, the small gathering. And he had his closest students with him as he was preparing to leave this world. And he told them, do not be sad. I'm going to a good place. In fact, I want you to celebrate this day. And so for many, many, many years, many generations, it was customary for people to go to the grave site of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. It kind of peaked a few years ago with quite literally 500,000 Jews within a 24-hour period who would go to Rabbi Shimon's burial place in Har Meron. And for example, my son would go every year, but he would take a bus from Jerusalem at about 2:00 in the morning. He would get there around 5:30 in the morning, daven as the sun came up, and then leave a few hours later. And people would come around the clock, and up to 500,000 people. I and my wife went there in 1977, I believe, and there were maybe 20,000 people there. And we stayed up all night, and we davened at sunrise. And it was quite an experience, an amazing experience. So it's Lag BaOmer. I hope everyone in their own way is celebrating. And so we're skipping to the part of the book called the Torah's Inner Dimension. Because I felt, why wait? Because today is the day that we're celebrating. So let's go right into it. So the first is just a tweet. Remember, some of these are very short because it used to be with tweet, you had very few words. Now they've increased it. And the longer ones are from his blogs. And as I've mentioned, he's appealing mostly possibly to people who don't have a background. As we'll see, he's speaking in very simple language, but his thoughts are very, very profound. So let's go. So the first one is a short tweet, but it's very potent. He says, from the Torah's revealed dimension, you learn how to feel like a child or servant of God. There's a whole thing, especially in Yom Kippur, this idea of feeling like a child of God feeling and acting like a child of God, or a servant of God. But Rav Ginsburg says, from the Torah's inner dimension, you learn how to feel like God's spouse. That's all he says. But what he's saying here is actually one of the greatest revelations of the Zohar, because Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai is, of course, associated with the text called the Zohar. And one of the greatest revelations of the Zohar is the idea of us being married to God. And it's really in the Zohar that explores the whole idea of masculinity and femininity in not just relationships, in energy. And since the basic idea is that every man has also a female component and every woman has a male component, we all have both elements. That's why when Adam was created, he was created male and female together. And that actually still exists, even though the male and female bodies were separated, but psychologically and in the soul, every soul has both components, but obviously a man has more of the masculine attributes and a woman is more of the feminine. So here he just says a beautiful thing. He says the revealed Torah helps us feel like a child or a servant of God, which is a very high level. But here he says that the inner dimension, we relate to God more as God's spouse. And here God is, even though God has both aspects also, the Shekhinah is, as it were, God's feminine aspect. But we usually, address God in the masculine, he. And the reason is because we are the feminine, males and females. All of Israel, all of creation is the feminine in relationship to God, because God is the giver and we are the receivers, but we also have a male component and we give back to God and to others. So this is very, very connected to Lag BaOmer, where we're celebrating Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and the whole mystical tradition. That's why it's called the holiday of the inner dimension of the Torah. Okay, now he goes to his first short blog called Water and Honey. So he says like this: Torah is likened to water, milk, olive oil, and honey. Meaning in different verses, in different books of the Bible, of the Tanakh, Torah is equated with or likened to water, milk, oil, and honey in different verses. Each has a different viscosity, meaning a different degree of resistance to flowing. Water has the lowest viscosity, which means it flows the fastest. Honey has the highest, which means it flows the slowest. So we all know honey pouring from a jar goes very slowly, and water, of course, pours quickly. So he says water symbolizes the Torah's revealed dimension, flowing quickly from its high origin to our low reality. So in other words, when Torah is equated to water, it's talking more about the revealed Torah. That's why in the book of Isaiah says, all who are thirsty, let them go to the water. And the rabbis have explained what it means is all those who are thirsty for spirituality, to closeness to God, they should go to the Torah, the water of the Torah. But then he says the honey of Torah refers to the sweet mysteries of divinity and creation. The speed with which it flows, it integrates into our consciousness, is slower. In other words, to integrate the inner dimensions of the Torah, it's in a certain way sweeter, but it takes longer to be able to truly integrate the inner dimensions of the Torah, because we have to really work at the deeper meanings of every letter, every word, every verse, every mitzvah, every story. If we just take it at face value, that's like water. It's getting to us quickly. You just read the text and that's it. That's the pshat. That's the literal meaning. But if you want what's called the remez and the drush and the sod, the more allegorical, metaphorical, symbolic, spiritual, mystical meanings, it's more like honey. You have to dig very deep. So what's interesting is last night, I mentioned I had the great merit to be with Rav Ginsburg. And the theme of the whole night was fire, because we know that the main, call it custom of Lag BaOmer is the bonfire. And so the whole night, and his teachings were interspersed with very joyous music. Of course, Rabbi Shlomo Katz, it's his shul, great musician. And Yosef Karduner was there. If anyone knows who he is, his music is, oh my gosh, the best of the best. But in between was teachings. I got home at 2:30 in the morning. It just went on, but the whole theme was fire. And so here he's equating Torah with water and honey, but in a different paradigm. He was comparing that again, what he said here, the revealed Torah is like water, but here he was dealing with 4 liquids: water, milk, oil, and honey. But we know also that the Torah equates God himself with fire, and that the Torah is called Eish Dat Lamo, a fiery law to his people. And so he was saying that the revealed Torah is like water, but the inner dimension of the Torah is like fire. And fire is full of enthusiasm, with energy, with light, brightness. And so he was equating that with the inner dimensions of the Torah. He said something very interesting. I'll share it. He said a very, very famous teaching in the Gemara is that the word for a man is ish, aleph, yud, shin. The word for a woman is isha, aleph, shin, hey. And so the word is when God is in the relationship between a man and a woman, then the man, it's fire. The relationship between husband and wife has many dimensions, but one of them is passionate, fire. But the Talmud says if you take out the yud for the man and the hey from the woman, these are 2 letters of God's name. So if you take God out of the equation, what you're left with is Eish, fire, and they will burn each other up. God forbid. God forbid. But he points out an amazing thing. He says, so both men and women have fire. Fire can be very destructive, but it could be tremendous light, warmth, incredible contributions to our lives. But he says that in a man, the yud is between the two letters of Aish, Aleph, Shin, but there's a yud in between. With a woman, it's Aish and then a Hey. So he said, and I have to say that Rav Ginsburg is, I don't know how you say it, his teachings are very, very encouraging for women and femininity in general. So he said that in essence, women have more fire than men. And he's saying that in a positive sense. In a positive sense, because again, there's no letter between the two letters of fire. So that's just an interesting thing, because this is very, very connected to the Zohar. Because the Zohar was really the first text that put tremendous emphasis on masculine and feminine energies. But again, in the Zohar, we're not really talking about male and female bodies. We're talking about energies. And since both males and females have both energies, so the Zohar, it explores deeply the feminine energy in the world in general and the masculine energy in the world. Okay, on to the next short blog. This is called Redeeming Souls Then and Now. The greatest mitzvah in the Torah is freeing someone from captivity. This throughout Jewish history has been a very, very important part of Jewish history, because constantly Jews were taken into captivity, either to be made into slaves or to get the community to pay a ransom. And they found that it was a quick way to riches. But here we see in the last few years the importance of redeeming our captives. And so it's a very current kind of idea. So he continues. In Hebrew, it is literally referred to as redeeming a soul. Today, redeeming a soul means freeing someone who is caught in false belief systems. So here he's expanded the idea of redeeming captives to the idea of people who are captives to foreign cultures or influences. And so he says, here we call it kiruv. In other words, to reach out to Jews, and according to Rav Ginsburg, where it's time to teach the whole world Torah, is to redeem souls, is not just captives in body, but also in spirit and in soul. Redeeming captives is different from what it used to be. It used to be about simply paying a ransom. Today, it's done in spreading light, in particular, the light of Kabbalah and Chassidut. Again, this section is so appropriate for Lag BaOmer, the holiday of the inner dimension of the Torah. So the whole idea of spreading Kabbalah and Chassidut is redeeming people from false identities, false philosophies, false ideas. But listen to what he says now. But even today, there is a monetary ransom to pay. We need technology to spread the light, and it's not free, but a little goes a long way. So this is a very interesting thing, because anyone who's involved in Jewish education, Jewish outreach, kiruv, knows that call it for better or for worse, we need money to do our work. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. So as the phrase goes, a word to the wise is sufficient. So obviously, I also have an organization to run, and I will take the time to thank many, many people who are live with us tonight. But as I've explained many times, by the end of the week, because how we share it on our social networking, which is what he says, that to spread, we need technology. So hundreds of people by the end of the week will be part of this class. So a word to the wise is sufficient, and we always appreciate whatever support that we have to allow us to continue our work. But it's just interesting that here this is Rav Ginsburg speaking, who, as I've said, in my estimation, is the greatest teacher of Kabbalah and Chassidut in the world today. Others would say he's one of the, but I'll claim that he's the greatest. But here he's being what's called tachlis. He's just talking simple reality. In order to put books out and be part of social networking, you have to have people, and people have to have a livelihood. So here, this is Kabbalah in the most literal sense. Now, the next one is a tweet. So again, it will be very, very short. It says, Kabbalah is the science of creation, taking us behind the scenes and telling us it's the making of the story. In other words, how does the story, some people say that the word history is his story, could be her story. But the idea is that all of creation, all of reality is an unfolding story, could put it in those words. And Kabbalah is the science of seeing what is making this, what moves the story, moving pictures, who's behind the movie. So then he says, Chassidut is the portrait of the Creator, who is unseen even behind the scenes. So here, this is very, very reminiscent of what we learn about Purim, because we know that God's name is not mentioned in the Megillah. We're told it's the only book of the 24 books of the Tanakh, of the Bible, that God's name is not mentioned. And so you read the whole story and like, where is God in all of this? That's why they made a holiday. In other words, first of all, everyone should know, when you read the Purim story, it reads like it happens over a few months. The story happens over 9 years. You have to know like the history here. 9 years. And then at the end, Israel is saved from Haman's evil decree, his plan. And only then were they able to connect the dots of everything that had happened these last 9 years to see how God was behind the scenes. That's why I'm mentioning this. Because he says, Chassidut is the portrait of the Creator who is unseen even behind the scenes in a certain way. He's even hidden behind the scenes. But after these 9 years, when we were saved from the genocidal plan of Haman, it was real. It's not just a story. We know, unfortunately, from just 75 years ago, when a maniac in Germany had every intention of doing what Haman wanted to do. Thank God he was stopped at just destroying a third of the Jewish people. But when they realized that God was behind the scenes the whole way, they made a new holiday. From the time that the Torah was given until Purim is approximately 900 years. No holidays were added during those years. All of a sudden, they realized the incredible miracle that had just happened, and they didn't even see it while it was happening. So they made a new holiday because they realized that God was really behind the scenes. Okay, the next one is called Rectifying Our Imagination. So he says like this: one of the objectives of studying Kabbalah is to rectify, broaden, and mature our associative powers of imagination. By learning Kabbalah, we witness unity. Now, I just have to try to explain this. By learning Kabbalah, we witness unity. In other words, Kabbalah is not just an intellectual pursuit. There's a very, very deep experiential component of our mystical tradition. Of course, we have to learn it and delve into it in an intellectual way, but it doesn't stop there. And so he's saying by learning Kabbalah, we witness unity. Not just we learn about unity, but we experience it. We feel it. It could be through meditation. It could be through prayer. It could be through study. But by delving into the inner dimensions of the Torah, we are experiencing unity. He continues, to recognize the symbolism as well as the synchronicity in the things that we see requires a high level of consciousness. Kabbalah helps us attain it. Again, he's speaking very simply, and I'm sure everyone's picking this up, like very fundamental concepts here. So here, what he's saying is that the study of Kabbalah helps us understand why things are happening, synchronicity, why things are happening the way that they're happening. Because the study of Kabbalah makes us sensitive to seeing connections, which leads to unity. It's a very, very important idea that by learning Kabbalah, it gives us a sensitivity to see connections between things that we might have not seen connections. Synchronicity in our life experiences is a manifestation of divine providence. So in other words, when we're able to see connections, the measure for measure, the reasons, the cause and effect that is going on in our life is a manifestation of divine providence. Again, it's a one-sentence statement, but it's so fundamental because the more sensitive we are to understanding the why things are happening in our lives and in the world the way that they are, the more we're witnessing divine providence in action. God is constantly talking to us. Learn to understand his language. So here, you see, he's like talking straight to us. He's not like talking about, he's talking straight to us. Learn to understand God's language. Try to relate what you see and hear to the weekly Torah portion. God looks into the Torah and creates the world anew continuously. I'm going to read that one again and try to explain it. God looks into the Torah and creates the world anew continuously. So it says in the Zohar, which is we're celebrating today, that God looked into the Torah and created the world. And it's usually given over in the past. In other words, before creation, there was no world. So how did God create the world? He looked into the Torah and he created the world. In other words, the Torah is like the blueprint. But here, if you caught the subtle change here, first of all, he says, try to relate what you see and hear to the weekly Torah portion. This is a fundamental concept in the Tanya and in Chabad and in Chassidut in general. The idea of looking into the weekly Torah portion and the holiday that's happening right then, or the upcoming holiday, to see what is happening in our own lives and what is happening in the world. So this is absolutely fundamental to Chassidut in general. The idea is that our lives are mirrored in the Torah portion. But here he says, and I'll read it again, God looks into the Torah, and he's talking in the present tense. God looks into the Torah and creates the world anew continuously. So in other words, the Zohar said God looked into the Torah and created the world. But we know, actually scientifically, quantum physics, that new energy, particles are coming constantly into being and out of being. Every billionth of a second, every atom in the universe is being has an influx of particles that literally last for a billionth of a second, and they disappear from reality. They are consumed. So here it says, it's not just, okay, we look in the portion and we see what's happening in the world. Why is that? Because God is looking into the portion and recreating the world anew continuously. So this is, it's really a further development of the idea of the Torah being the blueprint. It's an ongoing blueprint. And so for people who do this, so you'll understand exactly what this means, because sometimes it's astounding that you read the Parsha and then something happens in your life that's like, and you'll say, oh my gosh, this is so connected to the Torah portion or the holiday that is happening. So this is just a super fundamental. Okay, now we're going to, the next one is called submission, separation, and sweetening. For those who have been coming to these classes for a while, know that this is a concept from the Baal Shem Tov that Rav Ginsburg uses all the time. Now, I just want to explain is that this is a very common thing where a teacher, this could even be in the secular world, there's a lot of knowledge out there, a lot of wisdom. And in most cases, a teacher will latch onto certain concepts, and they latch onto it because it's meaningful for them. They're able to see great depths in these concepts. And so it could be that this teaching of what's called submission, separation, and sweetening, in Hebrew, hachna'ah, havdalah, and hamtakah, was one of thousands of the Baal Shem Tov's teaching. And here, just as an example, Rav Ginsburg has really zoned in on this teaching and made it a very, very fundamental part of his teaching. Because it's very hard to take, let's say, all 1,000 teachings of the Baal Shem Tov and make it a constant theme in your teaching. So this is something, again, people who have been coming to these classes know I've brought up repeatedly. And the reason I want to read this, because this is coming from Rav Ginsburg himself. And when I give it over, I usually give it over in a very, very practical way. And I usually give it over in the following way. But he's going to give it over, not that he would disagree with me, because I learned this from him also. But here in his words, he's giving over like the spiritual background of these three stages. The Baal Shem Tov said that every process follows these three stages. And over the years, I've used this to explain scores and scores of ideas. So I usually explain it like this in a way that people could really understand that submission, hachna'ah, means if I want to accomplish something, the first stage is I have to submit myself to accomplishing that task. In other words, a person could say, I want to do X, Y, and Z. But if they don't apply their will, if they don't have submission to accomplishing that, nothing happens. So the first stage is submitting to the task at hand. Separation, havdalah, means to be able, once you've set your goal, then there are things that will help you accomplish that goal, and there are things that will take you away from it, will distract you. And so separation, havdalah, means the ongoing process of deciding what will help me get to my goal and what will take me away from my goal. The goal could be something that you can accomplish in 1 hour or 1 day or 1 year, or let's say a profession. Let's say someone wants to be a doctor. Well, to go through undergraduate and graduate and residency and the whole thing, it's a 10-year process. So some processes can take 1 hour, some processes take 10 years, but it's the same process. And then the sweetening is when I've accomplished it, I feel good about it. I feel it was worth it. I'm happy with the outcome. I think we all know situations where we put a lot of effort into something, and then it doesn't turn out the way that we had hoped. We put all this effort, and there's no sweetening there. It's just, I wasted my time, or leads to frustration. But if you accomplish it, so we have a right to feel good about it. But that feeling good about it has to be directed to acknowledging and thanking God for the energy and the assistance to accomplish it. That's the greatest sweetening, when we can thank God for helping me. Then we feel God's closeness. So now, having said that, here I want you to hear Rav Ginsburg in his own words how he describes it. And again, he's going to describe it not as practical as I just did. So he says like this: the Baal Shem Tov taught that all spiritual service entails three developmental stages of consciousness: submission, separation, and sweetening. Submission means lowering the ego by quieting the psyche. Be silent before God. In a state of silence, I'm able to hear God's voice. So here, he's describing it not as I want to accomplish a task. Here he's describing it as a process of spirituality. That the first stage of spirituality, whether it's in human relations, in prayer, in meditation, in learning, in anything. So he says it means lowering the ego by quieting the psyche. In a state of silence, I'm able to hear God's voice. So anyone who does any type of meditation, there's many types of meditation, knows that we have to start with quieting the mind. Because if not, it's just the ego is just running 24/7. We have to quiet the wild horses of the mind to be able to get rid of the static, to be able to hear God's voice. Then he says separation means circumcising the heart's coarse, egocentric foreskin, so to speak, and becoming sensitive to the feelings of others. So again, he's talking in a very spiritual way, the same process, but in a spiritual development. Here with no connection to, the goal here is to be closer to God, to be more sensitive to other people, to know one's own soul, however we want to put it, all of the above. So that's the second stage. Separation is circumcising the heart. Because the ego is operating in the intellect, but it's also in the emotions. So that's the second stage, is once we've quieted ourselves and we can hear God's voice, the inner voice, it's really our own voice. So when we say hear God's voice in a certain way, it's synonymous with hearing our own inner spiritual voice. And then it has to be drawn to the heart because the emotions are wild. We all know that. Like a roller coaster. Every day we're on the roller coaster of our emotions. And then the last stage is called sweetening, hamtaka. Sweetening means the ability to alleviate one's own anxiety and the anxiety of others through pleasant, loving, and reassuring words. So here, this is just a beautiful idea, because you'll see in the second and third stages, other people are involved. It's not just my own private spiritual development. So Rabbi Shlomo used to teach all the time. He said, if you want to be close to God, you have to be close to other people. He said, don't tell me that you're getting close to God and you're isolating yourself from other people. He said, it doesn't work like that. And really, that's what Rav Ginsburg is saying also. I'll read it again. Sweetening means the ability to alleviate one's own anxiety. So again, first we quiet the ego. We hear that inner voice. Then we we circumcise our heart. We cut out, again, separation. When you think of circumcision, it's an act of separation. We cut off the foreskin. It's a literal act of separation. But here he's saying we have to do it with our heart. We have to cut off those emotions of anger and jealousy and pride and power, all those kind of things, in order to develop spiritually. And that helps us be sensitive to other people's feelings. And then the last stage of sweetening is that we all have anxiety. Some people's anxiety is more extreme. Some people's is easier to deal with. So in the last stage, though, we need to kind of get beyond the anxiety that fills our minds and our hearts, and also to be able to do it with other people. That's a sweetening, when we can have sweet relations with other people. So he ends by saying, the three stages can be identified as the underlying structure of countless topics in Torah. They are scattered throughout this book as well. So he's saying that he uses this paradigm to relate to just a wide gamut of different ideas. And I would encourage everyone to really do the same, to take these three stages in the spiritual way that Rav Ginsburg explained it, as well as the practical way that I explained it. They're not contradictory. They're just two sides of the same coin. Okay. So here, I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's a much longer one, but again, since it's Lag BaOmer, I want to read the first part of it. So he says like this: the oral Torah is a living, growing organism. From generation to generation, its many dimensions are constantly being reinterpreted, elucidated in greater depth. So here I want to explain also a very, very fundamental idea that I learned from Rav Ginsburg. And it sounds very simple, but it's very, very helpful to understand all of Jewish history. And he says like this: the farther we get away from Sinai, the more, in a certain way, unclear the transmission becomes. The farther away from Sinai we get in the mystical tradition, the more is revealed. So let me explain that. What he's getting at is, do you know that from the time that the Torah was given at Sinai, as recorded in the Torah, there almost 1,000 years went by, and there was no disagreements in the law. And then the Talmud explains that after about 1,000 years, so you can imagine, and this is before computers, the oral tradition was handed down loyally, and at people's mind, we can't even understand the greatness of their minds. You know, I heard from Rabbi Shlomo, because he was born in Europe, He didn't come to America until his early teens. He said that in the yeshivot in Europe before the war, what did they do for, call it fun? They would take a pin and they would put it through the pages of the Gemara. And the game was, because they knew the pages by heart, they knew hundreds of pages of Talmud by heart. If they see where the pin was going through on page 1, without looking, they could tell you which letter it's going through on page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He said that's what they used to do for fun. Now you can imagine everyone holding their, all these kids holding their devices and totally addicted to computer games. A little bit of a difference. So we really have no concept of the minds that we're talking about that were able to transmit an oral tradition for 1,000 years with no disagreements. But then they started to creep in. And today, there's a positive side and a negative side. And I think anyone knows if you have a question in Jewish law today, and you want an answer, it simply depends on which rabbi you go to. In other words, there are so many opinions, and each one has a perfect legal precedent reality to it. It's not contradictory. You could have a person who goes to 5 different rabbis with the same question, and very possibly could get, everyone says the same thing, or could get 5 different answers. And each one would be right. But that means that there's something a little bit not positive about that. There's some unclarity. But in the mystical tradition, that's what he's going to get to right now. The farther we get to signing means the closer we're getting to Mashiach. And the closer we're getting to Mashiach, the more and more is revealed in the mystical tradition. This is a very, very important idea. So listen what he says here. The Baal Shem Tov explained that there are 3 basic. Look at this. He's using the same paradigm again. The Baal Shem Tov explained that there are 3 basic dimensions to the Torah: submission, separation, and sweetening. Of these, now remember, he didn't necessarily say these 2 Torahs together. This was compiled 10 years after he said it, according to subject. But it's just interesting, after I said how many times that he uses this paradigm, here we have it in 2 ideas in a row. He says, of these, the submission and separation dimensions represent the relatively more revealed aspects of the Torah, which are reinterpreted in each generation. That's why you have so many opinions, and there's something very positive about it, because times change, people change, and therefore, now again, this is not the kind of thing where people say, well, the times have changed, so we don't have to keep Shabbos anymore. Times have changed, so we don't have to keep kosher anymore. Now, we're not talking about that. We're talking about within Jewish law that in every generation, the law is refined. Here he uses the word reinterpreted. I'll use the word refined. Now listen to what he says. The sweetening dimension of the Torah, however, representing its hidden aspect, meaning the mystical, contains truly new dimensions that are actually discovered in every generation. This is such an important part here. What he's saying is in the mystical tradition, and he's going to explain shortly, it's not just reinterpreted, but totally new dimensions of the Torah are being revealed in every passing generation as we get closer to Mashiach. So listen to what he says. And again, this is special for Lag BaOmer. The sweetening dimension of the Torah has gone through 4 major revelations. Moses, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, the Arizal, and the Baal Shem Tov. So this is very important. We have to understand, remember, today is the holiday of the inner dimensions of the Torah. In another 17 days will be Shavuot. That's the holiday of the giving of the Torah, but more the revealed Torah. But we have to understand that when Moshe received the 10 Commandments and the oral Torah, he also received the mystical Torah. In other words, the mystical Torah is not a later development. And in fact, really, the mystical tradition goes back to Abraham already. So Moshe, he received the written Torah, the oral Torah, and the mystical Torah. And then we're told that the Zohar says that the soul of Moshe is present in every generation. That a part of Moshe's soul reincarnates in every generation, and it's usually in one of the leaders of the generation, one of the Torah leaders of the generation. Rav Ginsburg says, based on the Arizal, that even though the soul of Moshe is present in every generation, the most fundamental incarnation of his soul was Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. That's why Lag BaOmer makes such a big deal of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. So the revelation of the Zohar was like totally new dimension was being revealed of the Torah. It wasn't just that the Torah is being like reinterpreted. It was new Torah that was coming from heaven. The next stage was the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, in the 1550s in Sfat, when it was called the Golden Age of Kabbalah in Sfat. The Arizal was in Sfat for approximately 2.5 years. That's it. He died at age 38. What he gave over in those 2.5 years revolutionized Kabbalah to this day. All Kabbalah today is based on the teachings of the Arizal, who was basing his Torah on the Zohar. Part of the Zohar, by the way, is called Raya Mehemna. That's call it a nickname for Moshe, the faithful servant, Raya Mehemna. And in the Zohar itself, there are discussions between Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and the soul of Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Arizal was one of the most unique souls in all of Jewish history. His revelations were, the word revolutionary is way too mild. More like radical. His teachings were radically new, and yet they were they were accepted because everyone understood that he was drawing it directly from heaven. He was that kind of a soul. And then who's the fourth? The Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov also, he was, many people don't realize this, because when you say the Baal Shem Tov, you think of miracle worker, think of miracle stories, you think of kind of like a folk figure. The Baal Shem Tov was a master of Kabbalah, and a master of the teachings of the Arizal. And what he did, and it still affects us to this day tremendously, is he took the teachings of the Arizal, who took the teachings from the Zohar, who was building on the mystical tradition up to that point, and he reformulated it into a new language that could be understood by everyone, by the masses. And so that's why usually, like you'll see in countless books where it says, according to Kabbalah and Chassidut, because at this point you can't even divide them. Everything that the Baal Shem taught was based on Kabbalah, but he didn't use the Kabbalistic jargon of the Arizal. He created a new language to give over the same ideas. And it's very similar to what we're learning here in The Wandering Jew. Here, we're reading it in English, and Rav Ginsburg is talking very simply here. I'm doing my best to explain the depths between each sentence that he's saying. That's what the Baal Shem Tov did. He was able to take these profoundly deep mystical ideas and turn them very psychological. Chassidut is extremely psychological in its very nature. It's dealing with the human soul, the human emotions, the human psyche. And he was able, especially like the Sfirot. In the Zohar, the Sfirot are channels of divine wisdom through which the world is created. It's the energy of the world. The Baal Shem Tov took the Sfirot and he created a psychological almost science of how to understand the soul through using the Sfirot. Listen, right now it's Sfirat HaOmer. Sfirat HaOmer we usually translate as the counting of the Omer, but it's the same word as the Sfirot. Sfirat HaOmer. That's why every day we do a inter-inclusion of two different Sfirot to give us a idea of what the energy of the day is. So this is a good place to stop. I just want to bless everyone. That one of the most important teachings in the Zohar from Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai is he said on the merit of learning the teachings of the mystical tradition that is found in the Zohar, that redemption will come to Israel with compassion. And this became the foundation of the Hasidic movement. This idea that by learning and teaching and discussing and integrating the mystical tradition, this is a absolute critical factor in bringing the Mashiach. So someone might say, well, how does that work? But That is what Kabbalah and Chassidut is teaching. That's how it works. The spreading of the inner dimensions of the Torah, which means spreading the Torah. But the inner dimensions, the light, the joy, the depths, this will bring the energy into the world that will bring us into the Messianic era. So this is really one of the most fundamental teachings of Kabbalah and especially Chassidut. And I'll end with this because many of you have heard this, is that in 1746, the Baal Shem Tov on Rosh Hashanah had what's called an Aliyat Neshama. His soul was elevated through prayer and meditation to a very, very lofty place. And in that place, he was in the presence of the soul of the Mashiach. And he asked the Mashiach, when are you coming? When is the master coming? And the Mashiach said, Vayafutsu ma'anatecha chutza. When the wellsprings of your Torah spreads to the farthest reaches, that is when I will come. So we can understand that became the foundation of Chassidut, is to spread the inner dimensions of the Torah to the farthest reaches. And as I always say, this is the only way to understand the Chabad movement and the phenomenal greatness of the past Lubavitcher Rebbe, who sent shluchim, messengers, all over the world to set up Jewish institutions, literally everywhere, in order to do exactly what the Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov, to take the light of the Torah and spread it to the farthest reaches. So there's virtually no campus in America or Europe that does not have a Chabad. I think they're in, 90 countries now. Chabad is in something like 90 countries around the world. It's beyond belief what he accomplished in 40 years. But it's the manifestation of what the Baal Shem Tov was taught. Vayafutsu ma'anatecha chutza. May we all merit to the secrets of the Torah.